Marjorie Ingram stood up at the back of the hall while the clerk was still reading, and the reading stopped. It stopped because a woman in a turf-cutter's coat had put her hand flat on the shoulder of the man in front of her, moved him aside, and walked 4 paces up the aisle of the great hall of Thurlow with 200 people watching her do it. The commissioners sat at the long table on the dais with the level book open in front of them. Mr. Gillam stood at the end of the table with his thumb marking the page of the presentments, and the Duke of Thurlow sat in the middle with his chair pushed back from the wood as a man sits who intends to sign what is put before him and then go out. "Read that last one again," Marjorie said. The clerk looked at the table. Nobody at the table said anything, so he read it again, in the flat voice of a man reading a list of fines. Reuben Bowden of the North Side presented for default of dike work upon his own frontage in the wet fortnight 2 years past, the bank being found neglected and the water having come over onto 11 acres of his neighbours, the fine standing, with the costs, at £9 and some shillings, the holding surrendered in part payment. "That's a lie," Marjorie said. The hall made the noise a full room makes when it decides to be very quiet. Somebody's stool went over. Gillam turned round with his thumb still in the book and looked at her with the particular patience of a man who has been interrupted by weather. "That is the presentment of the Dyke Reeves," he said, "sworn in this hall. It is written in the level book, and the level book is wrong," Marjorie said. "The water never came over Reuben Bowden's bank. It came through it. There is a difference, and every man in this room who has ever carried a spade knows what it is." The Duke of Thurlow put his hand out and turned the book round on the table so that it faced him. He did not look up. "Go on," he said. "The bank on the north side was made up new the spring before that," Marjorie said. "It was made up with what was carted out of the outfall, and what is carted out of the outfall is silt. It has shell in it. It dries out white, and it takes water the way sugar takes water. It is not galt, and no man who had ever handled galt would put it in a bank and call it done. The bank was made up under contract and passed," said Gillam. "Passed by whom, and standing where?" Marjorie said. "There is a gauge board at mile 3 that half this parish walks past on the way to church. In the wet fortnight, the water stood within 3 inches of the crest of that board for 11 days together, and the silt mark is on it now, and it has been on it for 2 years, and it is on it this evening. The book says the level ran off in 4 days. The board says otherwise. The board is out in the weather where anybody may see it. The book is in here." "The book," said Gillam, "is kept by men of long service." "The book was written sitting down," Marjorie said. She had not meant to say the next thing. She heard herself say it in the still air of that hall with the swallows going in and out of the open doors behind her, and she knew as it left her that it was cheap. "And it is signed by a man who has not stood on his own bank in 4 years. The Duke of Thurlow lifted his head then and looked at her for the first time, and the whole room saw him do it. Her father had been the expenditor of that level for 19 years, and had walked it end to end twice in every month of them, and had taught her to read water the way other men teach a daughter to read music. He had died in the spring of nothing dramatic, in his chair with his boots still wet, and because the post of expenditor is a post and not a possession, it went where posts go, and the house went with it. And by the summer Marjorie Ingram was 23 years old and living in a rented half of a cottage at Brack, cutting turf for wages in the dry weather and following the gangs in the wet. She was plain in the way that makes a face useful rather than remarkable, and she was not easily frightened, having already been dealt with by the worst thing available. She could take a level with a staff and a glass better than any man on the north side. Nobody had asked her to, and in the 6 months after her father was buried, before pride had had time to grow back on her, she had sat at a desk in the level office 3 days a week for 8 shillings, and copied figures out of Mr. Gillam's field book into the fair book in her own hand In a good round hand her father had taught her, and had known at least twice that the figures she was copying could not be true. She had not said so. She had needed 8 shillings. That was the whole of it, and she carried it in her the way a man carries a stone in his boot on a road he cannot get off. She had come to the court that August evening because Reuben Boden's land was to be signed away in it, and she had stood at the back with no plan in her head at all, and then the clerk had read out the words default of dyke work, and something in her had simply stood up without consulting her. The hall took a long time to empty afterwards. The commissioners went out by the dais door. Gillam went out by the dais door. The tenants went out slowly past her, and a few of them looked at her, and a good many of them looked at the floor, and Reuben Boden, who was a big, slow, careful man with a burnt neck, went past her without a word, and that was the worst of the evening. Dorcas, who cooked for the hall and had cooked for it since the old Duke's time, was putting out the candles at the far end with a wet thumb and a cloth, and she watched Marjorie come down the aisle and said, "You'd best go the back way. There's a lantern by the door if you want it." "I know the road," Marjorie said. "I know you know the road," said Dorcas. "Take the lantern." She walked the 4 miles home along the 8-mile drain with the lantern she had not wanted, and the level lay on either side of her the way it had lain all that summer, black, cracked, and dry as a hearth. The peat had shrunk so far in the drought that the field gates hung a hand's breadth clear of the ground they had been hung to. There was no water anywhere except a brown ribbon at the bottom of the drain, and the corn stood everywhere waiting, and the whole flat country smelled of dust and hot iron and dried fish. At 6 the next morning, somebody knocked on the door of the half cottage at Brack. Marjorie opened it with her hair still in its nightplait, and found the Duke of Thurlow standing in the yard among the hens with his coat over his arm, having ridden 5 miles at an hour when dukes are not generally awake. "Mr. Boden's fine is remitted," he said. "The land goes back to him this week. I have come about the other thing." "What other thing?" "You said the book was written sitting down." He was not looking at her. He was looking at the hens. "I want you to walk it." Marjorie held the door. "Say that plainly," she said. "Say it as it will be said in the parish, so that we both know what is being offered. The office of expenditor is Gillam's and stays his," he said. "I am not putting a woman into a sworn office. I could not do it if I wished, and I am not going to pretend otherwise on a doorstep. What I can do is employ you, directly, out of my own hand, and not the levels. You take the levels the whole length, every drain, every sluice, every bank, and you write what the water is doing, and you bring it to me, and I read it. That is the work. For how long? Until it is done, or until one of us throws the other out. And Gillam will hate it," said the Duke. Marjorie stood in the doorway with her arms crossed against the cold of the early hour, and did the piece of arithmetic that a person without money does very fast, and then did a slower one. "I'll do it on one condition," she said, "and it isn't wages." "Name it." "I don't write a figure I haven't walked to, not one, not to save a week and not to save my own skin, and nothing I do write gets altered afterwards by anybody at all. Not by Gillam, not by the clerk, not by the commissioners." She looked at him. "Not by you." The hens went on with their business. Somewhere behind the cottage, a man was sharpening a scythe with the long, unhurried noise of a man who has all day. "Agreed," said the Duke of Thurlow. "You'll want to think about that." "I have been thinking about it since 4:30 this morning," he said, "in a hedge, waiting for a decent hour to knock. There is a room at the hall with the maps in it, and a bed above it that was the clerk's before he married. It is yours from today. Dorcas will feed you whether you ask her or not." He put his coat on and untied his horse, and then stood a moment with the rein in his hand. "That thing you said at the end," he said, "about the bank. I know. It was true," he said, and rode away. The map room at Thurlow was a long, low room on the east side with 3 windows, and the windows had been shuttered for 4 years, so that when Marjorie came into it the first morning, it had the smell of a room where paper has been quietly dying in the dark. She got the shutters open with a chisel. Then she went through what was in there. The great map of the level was on rollers, 40 years old, drawn when the drainage was new, and it was beautiful, and it was a liar. The peat had been going down an inch a year since the day it was drawn, and there is nothing on a map to tell a man that the ground he is looking at has sunk 3 feet since the ink dried. There were field books back to her father's time. There were the gauge readings. There was a japanned box of instruments belonging to the level, and in it her father's own level, which had gone with the office, with the bubble tube cracked across and a wasp's nest in the tripod head. She put the level on the table and looked at it for a while, and then she went out and started at the outfall and worked upward, because that is the only direction the work can be done in. Taking a level properly is slow, and it cannot be hurried without becoming worthless. She set a plank down first, because a tripod stood straight on dry peat will sink under its own weight while a woman is reading, and 1/16 of an inch of sinking is a foot of error at the far end of a day. She set the instrument on the plank and levelled it up, turning it round on itself to see whether the bubble stayed where it was put. She took a back sight to the benchmark cut in the sill of the middle sluice. She sent the staff forward and took a foresight and wrote both in the book with the hour beside them and reduced them there in the field and not afterwards in a chair. She went forward and did it again, and 31 times more before the light went, and at the end of the day she brought the line back around onto the sluice sill she had started from, and closed it, and found herself out by 3/4 of an inch in 9 miles, which is honest work. It took her 11 days. What came out of it was this. The 8-mile drain had been dug with a fall of 4 inches in the mile, which is little enough, but is enough, provided the bed stays where it was cut. From the outfall up to mile 2, the fall was still there. From mile 2 to mile 5, there was no fall at all. There was a rise of 2 inches in the middle of it, in the bed of a drain, which is to say that for 3 miles the water in that channel was not running anywhere. It was standing and waiting to be pushed. Silt had come up the drain from the outfall on the tides for years, and had been dredged out only where it could be seen from the road. And the sill of the middle sluice, which had been set level with the fen when the fen was drained, now stood 11 inches proud of the ground it was supposed to serve, because the ground had gone down and the brickwork had not. The low level could no longer get its water out by gravity at all. It could only be lifted out by the engine, and the engine was a thing that burned coal, and coal was a thing that was bought. She brought that to him on the 12th evening in the map room, with the field books open and the lamp lit. "Say it in a sentence," said the Duke. "Your low level has no fall in it. Your sluice is standing 11 inches above its own work, and everything you take off the north side comes off on Silas's engine, or it does not come off at all," Marjorie said. "There, that's the sentence. The rest takes an hour." "Then take an hour." She took an hour and 10 minutes standing with a rule and a pencil, and he sat with his boots crossed at the ankle and did not once say that he understood before he understood. Twice he made her go back. Once he said, "Show me the closing error," and she showed him. And he looked at the 3/4 of an inch for a while and then said, "Your father wrote his the same way, at the bottom, in the corner." He said, "A man who doesn't publish his error is telling you the size of it," Marjorie said. At the door, she stopped. "There's no fall in the drain because nobody has slubbed it out above mile 2 in 6 years, she said. "That work is charged for every year in the level accounts." "I know," said the Duke of Thurlow. "That is why I sent for you, and that is as far as either of us goes tonight." Dorcas fed her at the kitchen table because Dorcas fed everybody at the kitchen table, and for the first 4 days set the food down as though it were being left for a dog that might bite. On the 5th day, Marjorie came in at 9 at night with mud to the thigh and found the copper full and the fire in. "That's not for me," Marjorie said. "It's not for the cat," said Dorcas. She sat down heavily on the settle, which she did not usually do, and rubbed her wrist, which she did constantly. "I'll say my piece, and then it's said," Dorcas said. "I was in that hall when you stood up. I'd have knocked your head off for it, speaking to him like that, in front of the commissioners, in front of the whole level. I know. You don't know. He was 6 months in this house before you came, and he never once went east of the yard. Never went to the engine. Never went on a bank." Dorcas looked at the fire. "And the morning after you spoke to him, he was up and gone before 5, and he's been out of this house at 5 every day since, and last Tuesday he came in with his hands blistered because he'd been down in the drain with the gang, which I don't approve of, and I don't approve of you, and I've put a hot brick in your bed because you'll get the rheumatism in that back room, and then where will anybody be?" Marjorie looked at the copper steaming. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me, Eat," said Dorcas. The engine stood 2 miles out on the north side in a brick house with a chimney, and Silas lived beside it in 3 rooms, with his lungs full of 40 years of coal. He was 71, and he had been the engine man since the engine was new, and before that he had been at the windmill that the engine replaced, and he could hear a bearing going warm through a wall. Marjorie came for the coal book and stayed 4 hours and came back the next week and the week after that. "You want to be careful of him," Silas said the 3rd time. "He was sitting on the step in the sun with his hands hanging between his knees, in the attitude of a man who has been told to rest and does not believe in it. Not the way the parish means. The other way." "What other way?" "He'll take everything you tell him and he'll believe it. And that's a dangerous thing to hand a man who's frightened of his own judgment." Marjorie put the coal book down. "Say that." Silas took a while. Out on the level, a heron went over, slow as a rumour. "You'd have been, what, 19, 20, he said. "The wet autumn. Old Duke dead a fortnight, and this one home from wherever they'd sent him, 26 and green as grass, and it came on to rain the way it did that year. Water in the low level 5 days, and no getting rid of it, and the commissioners are all 40 mile off, and the expenditor, your father, God rest him, is on the south side, cut off by his own water and can't get across. So it's him, 26 years old, standing in this doorway at 2 in the morning with the rain going sideways, and every man on the north side looking at him. What did he order? "There's 2 ways it can go," Silas said. "Hold the doors shut at the middle sluice and let it stand and drown the low fen and lose the wheat, or open them and let it away east across the washes and save the low fen." He opened them, and he was told, mind, by me among others, that there was men out on the washland getting the cattle up, and he said, "Get them off," and men went, and word went, and it was 2 in the morning in the rain. Silas looked at his hands. "My brother Amos was on the washland," he said. He'd gone back for a beast. He was 54 years old, and he'd been in water all his life, and he went out under the bank and he never came up till the Thursday. Marjorie did not say anything at all, which was the correct thing, and she knew it was the correct thing and did it anyway with difficulty. "Now you listen," said Silas. "I don't hold it against him, and I've told him so to his face twice, and telling a man a thing twice is as much as any man will take. It was the right order. If he'd held them shut, we'd have lost 1,100 acres, and I'd have had 4 dead instead of 1, and I'd still have had 1. But he made the order. He stood in that door and he made it, and the water went where he sent it, and it took my brother. And after, said Silas, he never gave another order about water in his life, handed the whole level to Gillam, signed what was put in front of him, and went away. And when he come back, he stopped in his house. 4 years. He'll not read a gauge. He'll not say what the water will do. He was wrong about water once, and a man died of it, and he has got it into his head that his reading of a thing is the most dangerous article in the county." He got up off the step slowly and in stages, And then you stood up in his hall and told him his book was written sitting down. That was cruel, Marjorie said. It was, said Silas. It was also the first thing anyone said to him in 4 years that wasn't managing him. There's your dinner going cold. Come inside. She got back to the hall at 11 that night, and the map room had been changed. The table had been moved under the middle window, where the light would be on it in the morning and not behind her. There was a chair with arms instead of the stool, and on the table, sitting on a folded cloth, was her father's level, cleaned of 40 years of green, the wasp's nest gone out of the tripod head, and a new bubble tube in it, fitted and adjusted and true, which is not a thing a village man does, that had been sent away for. She stood in the doorway and did not go in for some time. He never mentioned it. She never mentioned it. In the morning she took it out to Mile 4 and read with it all day, and it was better than the level zone, and she found that she had to stop twice on the bank for no reason at all. The nights that August were too hot to be indoors. The custom of the house became that at 9 or so the Duke of Thurlow would walk out to wherever she had finished, and they would sit on the dry bank with a lantern and whatever Dorcas had put in a basket and talk, and this was noticed by everybody and remarked on by nobody within hearing of either of them. "There," he said one evening, pointing with a cherry stalk. "That is a hill. That is a spoil heap. It has a slope on it. It has 2 slopes on it, which is generous. It is dug clay from 18 years ago with grass on it," Marjorie said. "A hill has stone under it. This country has no stone in it anywhere, not a pebble, not a flint, nothing to throw at a crow. If a stone turns up in a fen field, a man takes it home and puts it on his windowsill. Purgatory has a rise in it. Purgatory is a field. It does not have a rise in it. It has a place where the peat has gone down slower because there's clay near the top." "That is what a hill is," said the Duke. "That is the opposite of what a hill is. That is everything else going down. You are describing a hill. I am describing a subsidence with an exception in it," Marjorie said. And he laughed, which he did rarely and badly in one syllable, like a man dropping something. "Who names the fields here?" he said. "I have a field called Hunger, a field called Little America, and a field called Bell and Hare, and there is no bell and there is no hare. There was a public house. There is no public house. There was in 1790. Then it should be called Where the Public House Was," he said, "and I would know where I stood. You would have 400 fields called Where Something Was." "That would be honest," he said. "Every one of them, where the wood was, where the mere was, where the ground was, 11 inches up." A midge went into the lantern and made a small noise. Marjorie ate a cherry and put the stone in her pocket, because throwing it away on a fenbank means finding a cherry tree there in 3 years and wondering. "There's a hill at Ely," she said. Ely is 12 miles away. It's a hill, though. You can see the cathedral from the middle sluice on a clear day, and it stands up out of the level like a ship. So the argument is that this county has one hill and it is somewhere else. "The argument," said Marjorie, "is that you have got a country here where a man can see his own house from 4 miles off and know by the smoke whether his wife is up, and there is nowhere else in England you can do that, and you want it to have a hill in it." "I want it to have one hill," he said. "I am not unreasonable. 1 hill and 1 stone. You may have the spoil heap." "I shall call it something," he said. "You shall not." He called it something. He called it Ingram's Hill in front of the gang the following Thursday, and the gang took it up within the hour because there is nothing a fen gang enjoys more, and it is on the tithe map of that parish to this day, 3 feet high, with grass on it. Reuben Bowden came back onto his land in the 3rd week of August and did not speak to her for 11 days. On the 12th, she was at Mile 3 with the staff, alone, trying to hold a 9-foot staff plumb in a wind that had got up out of the north, which cannot be done. She had it braced against her boot and her shoulder, and was losing it, and then it went steady, and Reuben was holding the foot of it with his cap under his arm. "Read it, then," he said. She read it. She sent him forward, and he stood the staff where she waved him, and they did 2 hours of it that way, and at the end he sat down on the bank with his elbows on his knees. "They fined me £9, he said. "I paid 7 of it, and they took the 11 acres for the rest. I sold the cow to pay the 7. My wife has not had a cow for 2 years, and she is a woman that likes a cow." "I know," said Marjorie. "They read it out in that hall that I'd let my bank go in front of my neighbours." He was looking straight out over the level. "I have carried Galt onto that bank every March since my father died, and they read it out that I'd let it go, and I stood in that hall, and I couldn't say nothing because I hadn't got the words, and Gillam had the book. The book was wrong." "I know the book was wrong," Reuben said. "Everybody in that hall knew the book was wrong. That's what I'm telling you. Every man in the room knew, and every man in the room stood there." He turned his cap over, including me when it was Tam Selby's turn, the year before mine. The wind came across the dry corn with a sound like somebody turning over in bed. "So, I'll hold your staff," he said, "and I'll hold it every day you want it held, and that's all I've got to say about any of it." "Thank you," said Marjorie. "And you can stop looking at me like that," Reuben said, "because I never said I forgive nobody. I said I'd hold the staff." He held the staff. And in September, the gangs who had called her nothing at all for 6 weeks began calling her Mrs. Ingram, which was wrong, and then Miss Ingram, which was right, and one morning a bankman she had never spoken to took the other end of the chain out of her hands without asking, and walked out with it to the mark, and that was that. The Duke saw 3 things that autumn that nobody knew he saw. He saw her from the yard take the other end of Dorcas's copper without being asked and carry it in, and then stand at the sink afterwards rubbing Dorcas's wrist between her 2 hands in the way that helps for about an hour, saying nothing while Dorcas told her a long story about somebody's funeral in 1819. It made him feel, standing in his own yard, like a man looking through a window into a house he had been born in and could not now find the door of. He saw her, from the top of the bank at mile 6, stop for 20 minutes to write a letter for a man who could not write, and take no notice of the fact that the man dictated the same sentence 4 times, and read it back to him twice, and then walk 2 miles out of her way to leave it at the post. He went home and could not eat. And he saw her, one evening, put her own coat over a stack of another man's sacks when it came on to rain, and walk home in her shirt. And he sat down on the bank in the wet and stayed there a while, and what he thought was very simple and had no words attached to it that he was willing to use. The tide came in on the 11th of September with a north wind behind it and the whole North Sea shoving. Marjorie was at the outfall at 4 in the afternoon when the doors stopped. That is what an outfall does on a bad tide. The sea comes up higher than the drain, and the great doors, which open outward and are held open only by the water inside pushing, swing to and shut themselves, and the level cannot get rid of a drop until the tide falls again, 12 hours on that tide, and the wind was holding the water up in the wash, and the engine was lifting into a drain that had nowhere to put it. She was at mile 3 at 7 with the light going, walking the toe of the north bank, and she saw it. There was a spring of water coming up out of the flat ground 11 feet behind the bank, out of a hole the size of a teacup, and it was running the colour of weak tea, and it was carrying sand. She sent Reuben for the gang, and she sent a boy for the engine, and she stood there in the dusk and watched the bank of Thurlow level quietly, eating itself. The Duke came at 8:30 with 40 men behind him and the carts, and he came straight to her along the toe of the bank and said, "Tell me." "It's a boil," she said. "The water's found a road under the bank and it's coming up behind. That hole is the far end of it. Then we stop it." "No." She had a grip of his sleeve without having decided to. "Listen to me," If we plug that hole, the water under the bank has to go somewhere and it will find a softer place and come up as a hole the size of a cart, and then the bank goes in 10 minutes and we lose the whole low level. You never stop a boil, you ring it. Say what that means. Sacks. A wall of sacks in a circle round the hole, a yard across, and we build it up as high as we can and let it fill with its own water. When the water inside stands as high as the head that's driving it, it stops pulling. It'll go on running, but it'll run clear. She was already moving. Clear is safe. Sandy is the bank coming out. If any man tells me it's running sandy, we're all off this bank and away, and I mean that, and I want it said to every man here. He said it to every man there, in a voice that carried, and then he took his coat off and he was in the mud with the rest of them for 11 hours. It was a filthy night, and there is no romance in it. Sacks were filled from the borrow pit and hauled 40 yards and set in a ring in the dark with lanterns held over, and the ring had to be built true. Courses laid across the joints like a bricklayer, and it had to be built faster than the boil could eat, and twice it slumped and had to be dug and rebuilt. Silas kept the engine going all night to hold the head down on the far side and burned 3 months of coal doing it. Dorcas came out at midnight with 2 women and a cart of bread and tea and a bottle of something and stayed till morning. At 2 o'clock, Marjorie went into her knees in the pit and could not get out, and the Duke of Thurlow took her by both wrists in the dark and pulled her out with a noise like a cork, and neither of them let go for the space of about 4 seconds, and then somebody shouted for Sacks. At 3, she lay down flat on the top of the ring with a lantern and put her hand into the water inside it and held it there. "Clear," she said. "It's clear. Bring it up another course, and then we may sit down." They brought it up another course. And a little after 4 in the morning the water inside the ring stood still and level, and the running stopped being a running and became a slow turning, like water in a pot before it boils, and the men on the bank stopped shouting and stood about looking at it, and one of them said something obscene with great tenderness. And the tide turned at the outfall, and the doors opened, and the whole level began very slowly to go away east. Marjorie sat down on the wet sacks. The Duke sat down next to her, because there was nowhere else, and they watched the light come up grey over 1,100 acres of standing corn nobody was going to lose, and neither of them said one word about anything, and that was the largest thing that happened that autumn. Wherever you are listening tonight, is it quiet where you are? Or is there weather at the window? Stay with me a while yet. The water is not finished with these 2, and neither am I. 3 days after the boil, they were still eating breakfast on the bank because neither of them could be bothered to go in, and the talk was entirely about scythes. "You cannot scythe," Marjorie said. "I can scythe." "You held it like a man rowing." "I opened 11 yards." "You opened 11 yards of ruin," she said. "There's a fortnight of grass there that'll never stand up again. You want the point down and the heel down and the whole thing swung flat, and you were chopping at it like a man killing something. Show me then, not on the good grass, on the bad grass." "There isn't any bad grass. That's the entire difficulty with you," Marjorie said, and he laughed the dropped syllable laugh, and they went and did an hour on the headland where it did not matter, and he was, by the end, not disgraceful, and said so twice, and she said, "adequate," in the voice of a woman conferring a peerage. Gillam came to the map room on the last Friday in September at 7 in the evening, when the hall was empty and the Duke was at Lynn. He did not sit. He walked the length of the great map with his hands behind his back and looked at her field books stacked in their order with the dates on the spines and made a small approving noise. "That is good work," he said. "I mean it as it is said. I have not seen a line closed that tight on this level since your father. Thank you." "He would be pleased." Gillam turned. He was 50 and neat, and had a pleasant plain face and a voice that a room believed. "Miss Ingram, I have come to say 2 things, and I would rather say both of them in here than have either of them said in a hall." "Say them." "The first is that I am not against you. It is convenient for the parish to think it, and I have let them think it, and it has cost me nothing. But a level wants slubbing out above mile 2, and I have said so in writing for 6 years, and the commissioners have not found the money for 6 years, and I have made shift with what I could get. And what I could get was the outfall dredgings. And it is not gold, and I know it is not gold, and I put it in a bank because the alternative was no bank at all. He spread his hands. That is the whole of my crime, and I would like it weighed by somebody who understands what it is to be given £90 a year and a level 9 miles long. That is well said, Marjorie said, and it does not account for the slubbing that was charged for and not done, nor for 11 acres taken off Reuben Bowden for water that came through the bank you made. Gillam's face did not change. The second thing, he said pleasantly, is that I am not going to be examined by you. Nobody is examining you. His Grace reads what you put in front of him, and he reads nothing else. That is examination with a woman's name kept out of it. He came back down the room. Miss Ingram, I have the level book from 4 years back, and I have the fair copy for that year, and the fair copy is in a very good round hand, yours. 211 pages of it. There are figures in that book that will not stand, and they are in your hand, and they are signed at the foot of every page by the copyist, as the office requires. The lamp hissed. Yes, said Marjorie. You may say you were told to write them. I was told to write them. You may say you did not know. I knew, not all of it, twice that I could swear to I knew. Then you will understand, said Gillam, that if a hall is ever told that the level book cannot be trusted, the hall will want to know whose hand it is in, and it is in yours, and it is not in mine. I never write anything myself. I have not written a figure into a fair book in 20 years. That is what a copyist is for. He put his hat on. I do not want that day. It would be a bad day for me, and it would be a ruinous day for you. I want the slubbing done and the money found and the North Bank made up properly with galt brought from Whittlesea at 11 shillings a yard, which I have costed, and I want it to happen without any hall being told anything at all. Bring your report to His Grace by all means. Bring me the page about the bank first, and let me put my name on the recommendation, and we all get what we want. No, Marjorie said. Consider it a week. No. Miss Ingram, said Gillam from the door kindly, I have watched 3 expenditors and 2 dukes on this level, and I will tell you the only thing worth knowing about it. Nobody is ever punished for the water. They are punished for the writing. He went out. She sat in the map room until the lamp needed doing, and then she went upstairs and lay on the bed in her clothes with her eyes open, and there was no part of what he had said that was not true. A fortnight later, the commissioners came for the autumn court, and Gillam said across the table, in front of 11 men, in the mildest voice in the world, Miss Ingram is very exact. She learned in the office, of course, copying. The rain came at the end of October, and the low level took it and let it go, and the corn was in, and the whole of the north side knew whose ring of sacks was still standing, at mile 3, and on the first still night of November, Marjorie Ingram walked out to the middle sluice on her own to have it out with herself. There was no wind at all. The water had come back into the drain, and it lay there black and full to the top of the reeds, and every star that existed was in it twice, and the whole level was so quiet that she could hear the sluice weeping through its own gates half a mile off. She sat on the sill with her boots hanging over. She was in love with him. That had to be looked at first, plainly, without arrangement, the way a figure has to be read as it stands, and not as it ought to be. She had known it certainly since the night of the boil, and probably since the level with the new bubble tube in it. There was no use in being clever about it. Then the rest of it, in order, the way her father had taught her to reduce a line. Backsight, foresight, and the difference is the truth whether it suits or not. He had come to her cottage at 6 in the morning because a man had stood in a doorway 4 years ago and given an order about water, and a man had died of it. That was what she was. She was the reading he could not make himself. She was the thing he had put in the place of his own judgment so that he would never have to use it again, and he was kind to her the way a man is kind to a wall he is leaning his whole weight on. Not falsely, not coldly. But that was the ground it stood on, and ground was her trade, and she knew the difference between a thing built on galt and a thing built on silt, however handsome it looked from the road. And when the level was right, when the drain had its fall and the sluice was rebuilt down to the ground the fen had shrunk to, and the north bank was galt from Whittlesey at 11 shillings the yard, there would be nothing left that he needed. The debt would be paid. He would stand on his own bank and read his own gauge and be a man again, and she would have made him so, and that would be her whole work in the world, and it was not a small one. He would marry. There was money wanted for the sluice, £4,000 of it, and money in that county went about in families and was spoken of in the same breath as daughters, and she had heard the word Prideaux in the hall twice that autumn in the voice men use for arrangements. She sat there a long while and let herself want it, since there was nobody to see, and the wanting was very simple and had no words in it, only a picture of a kitchen in winter with 2 people in it and nothing happening at all. Then she took her hands off her knees and stood up. "Well," she said out loud to 9 miles of black water, "there it is then." She walked back and went to bed and was at mile 6 with the staff at 7 the next morning, because whatever else is true, the fall in a drain does not measure itself. The presentment came on the 14th of November in open court with the hall full to the doors as it had been in August. Gillam stood at the end of the long table and said that it was his painful duty, that questions had been raised about the level book, that he had made inquiry, and that the alterations and false entries in the book of 4 years back were in one hand and one hand only, the hand of the copyist then employed, who had since been engaged privately by his Grace to take levels which no man had checked, and that he asked the commissioners to adjourn the court 8 days, and to have the book brought in, and the copyist present. The Duke of Thurlow sat perfectly still and said nothing at all. He said nothing to her that night, and he did not come to the map room, and he did not come the next day either. The hall on the 22nd of November was fuller than it had been in August, because word had gone about the whole level. Mr. Prideaux was in the chair. The book lay open on the table with a ribbon in it. Gillam spoke for 11 minutes, and he spoke well, and he ended by turning the book round to face the room, and the room could see 200 pages of a very good round hand. "Miss Ingram," said Prideaux, "the court will hear you." Marjorie came up the aisle. She had her field books under her arm, and Silas's coal book, and nothing else. "The hand is mine," she said. She let that stand in the room until it had reached the back of it. "I copied into that book for 6 months, 3 days a week, for 8 shillings, after my father died, and before I had anything else. Twice that I can swear to, I copied a figure I knew could not be true. The water that autumn stood 11 days, and I wrote 4. I did it because I wanted the 8 shillings, and because I did not want to be turned off. Nobody made me. I was 22, and I could count, and I wrote it down. Reuben Bowden was presented on those figures the year after, and fined £9 and lost 11 acres, and sold his cow. I was in the parish. I knew what the book said, and I knew what the water had done, and I said nothing about it for 2 years, until this August, in this hall, when it was too late to be any use to him. That is mine, and I am not going to be talked out of it, and it is not undone by anything that follows. Now here is the rest. That autumn, the water stood 11 days on the north side. There are 2 ways water gets into a low level. It falls out of the sky, or it comes through a bank. I have my father's rain glass and his book, and it is 14 days' rain in that fortnight, and I have written it out, and any man may have it. Silas has kept his engine hours in chalk on the wall of the engine house every day for 40 years, and he has never once been asked for them. That wheel lifts, at 4'6" of lift, about 60 tons in the minute. He ran 209 hours in that fortnight, 209 hours at that wheel takes 8.5 inches off 1,100 acres. The rain that fell was 5.25 inches. The engine took off more than the sky put on. There was still water standing to the depth of a foot on the north side for 11 days, and it is on the gauge board at mile 3 with the silt mark on it, where it has been for 4 years, where any of you may go and look at it tonight. It did not come out of the sky, it came through the bank. The bank was made up new that spring, out of the outfall dredgings, which is silt with shell in it, and I have driven a bar into it in 3 places this autumn and brought it up in dry lumps with dust between them, and a bank of puddled galt comes up in one waxy body and takes a boot print without cracking, and that one does not, and it never did. Reuben Bowden did not let his bank go. His bank was never made. She put the coal book on the table. That is the whole of it, she said, and I have nothing to say for myself about the 6 months because there is nothing to say. There was a considerable silence in the hall of Thurlow. Then Reuben Bowden stood up at the back, holding his cap in the middle of 80 men he worked among. "I'll say a thing," he said. "I've a paper at home. It's the receipt for my £7, wrote out by Mr. Gillam's clerk. On the back of it there's the tally of the galt carts I stood and counted onto my own frontage that March because I stood there 3 days and counted them, being a suspicious man. There's 41 carts. Mr. Gillam has charged the level for 190. He turned the cap round. "I never brought it out afore. I'm in his gang. I've 6 of us at home. If I go out of that gang tomorrow, I don't know what I'll do." "Fetch it," said Prideaux. "I've got it here," said Reuben. "I've had it in my coat since August." They passed it up the hall from hand to hand, 11 men handling it, and every one of them looked at it on the way. Gillam said, "Mr. Bowden cannot count carts he did not see," and it was the right sentence, and it came out at the right moment, and it landed in the room like a coin dropped on mud. He heard it land. That was the thing that everybody in that hall remembered afterwards. They watched a man hear his own voice stop working. "Gentlemen," he said, "I have served this level 22 years. Nobody said anything. "I have served it," he said, "with, under conditions which no one at this table has ever, the money was never," and he stopped and looked at the book and turned 2 pages of it for no reason and stopped doing that too. He did not shout. He went in the space of about a minute and a half, from a man addressing a court to a man standing in a room, and then he sat down on the chair behind him without being asked to, and put his hand over his mouth, and stayed like that. Prideaux said, "There are the accounts for 6 years to be gone into, and I would say to this court that there is more here than the level book," and the hall made a sound of assent, and a man near the front said the word constable. "No," said Marjorie. She was still standing at the table. She did not raise her voice. She had not raised it once all afternoon. "He is finished, and every man here has watched it, and that is enough for 1 day," she said. "Put the 11 acres back on Reuben Bowden, and get the galt from Whittlesey, and let Mr. Gillam go home." Then she picked up her field books and stood aside, and nobody in the hall of Thurlow said anything more about it at all. At 10 that night, Marjorie was in the engine house with her bag on the floor and Silas's kettle going, because she could not have stayed in that hall another hour, and there was nowhere else on the level she was welcome at 10 at night. "You'll not do it," Silas said. "I'm on the Lynn carrier at 6. She was folding her one good dress badly. "There's an uncle of my mother's at Wisbeach, and he'll have me for the winter, and there's work at Wisbeach. They're cutting the new drain, and they'll want a chainman if they'll take a woman, and I've written. After what you done in that hall today. Because of what I did in that hall today." She sat down on the coal bench. "Silas, every man on this level now knows I wrote false figures in a book. It doesn't matter that I said it myself. It doesn't come out. Reuben Bowden lost his cow, and I've got, what? A clean conscience and a warm bed in that house. Somebody has to pay for 2 years, and there's nobody else standing here. That's not paying. That's running. It might be both. Silas coughed for a while and got his breath and looked at the fire door. Girl, he said. Nobody ever mends a thing they broke on their own. It's not in the nature of it. You mend it by stopping where it broke, and being there in the morning, and being there the morning after that, till folk forget to be careful of you. That's the whole trick, and it's a poor one, but it's all there is. That's a good sentence, Marjorie said. You should have it put up somewhere. Don't be clever with me at my time of life. I'm on the carrier at 6, she said, and picked up her bag. The Duke of Thurlow did not know any of that, because he was in the map room until midnight going through 6 years of accounts with Prideaux, and it was not until Dorcas came in at 6:30 the next morning and said, with tremendous satisfaction, her bed's not been slept in and her bag's gone, that he came out of the house at a dead run in his shirt sleeves. He caught the carrier at the Staithe at Brack in front of the cart, and the carrier, and 11 people waiting to go to Lynn, and Reuben Bowden, and half a gang standing on the bank with their tools, because it was 7 in the morning on a working day. Get down, he said. I've paid. Come, said Marjorie. Get down. He put his hand on the cartwheel and then took it off again. No, stay up there. It does not matter. I shall say it from here. I sat in that hall yesterday, and I heard Gillam present you, and I want it said in front of these people that between the 14th and the 22nd I did not come to you once. 8 days. I read that book on the second night by myself at midnight, and I looked at your hand in it, and for about an hour I thought... He stopped. I thought, she wrote it, and I sat there with it, an hour. I have had 4 years of being a man who will not put his name to anything, and I have made it into a virtue. And it is not one. It is cowardice with good manners on it, and it cost you 8 days on your own in my house, and I shall not get those back. That's the apology, Marjorie said. What's the rest? The rest is that I am not... He shut his eyes briefly. You said you would not write a figure you had not walked to. I want... He gave it up and started again in the plainest voice he had. Don't go to Wisbech, marry me. I have got nothing to offer that you have not already mended yourself, and everybody here knows it, and I'm asking anyway. Somebody's horse shifted. The carrier, to his eternal credit, looked at the sky. Marjorie Ingram sat in the cart with her bag on her knees. Say the last part again, she said, so they've all heard it. Marry me, said the Duke of Thurlow. They were married in the January from the hall, with the whole of the north side in the church and Dorcas crying in a manner she denied for the rest of her life. Gillam went in December to a brother-in-law's coal yard at Lynn, and the accounts were gone into, and the sum was found, and it was paid back over 11 years out of his wages, which was Prideaux's doing, and Marjorie never spoke of him again except once, when a man in the yard called him a thief in her hearing, and she said, he was a man with £90 a year and 9 miles of bank, and went on with what she was doing. Silas lived 4 more years and taught 2 men to run the engine, and the chalkboard with his hours on it was never wiped. It hangs in that engine house now, under glass, because a commissioner's clerk who understood what it had done put it there. Reuben Bowden was made Dyke Reeve for the north side that spring, and had the 11 acres back, and bought a cow in April and was insufferable about it until August. The middle sluice was taken down to the ground the fen had shrunk to, and rebuilt 11 inches lower in the summer of the 2nd year, and the low level ran off by gravity for the first time in a generation, and there is a stone in the west wing of it with 2 names cut on it, and the second name is not the Duke's. They held the Court of Sewers in the Great Hall every autumn after that, and after the 2nd year there was a chair set at the long table on the dais at the end where the expenditor sits, with a woman in it, and her field books stacked in front of her with the dates on the spines. And there came an October afternoon with the hall full to the doors, when the Duke of Thurlow read out a recommendation about the Washland Bank, and the Duchess of Thurlow said, No. 200 people stopped moving. Say it then, said the Duke. It's wrong. It's wrong by 2 inches, and the 2 inches are the whole argument, and I'll tell you what's happened. Somebody has read it off the old survey instead of going out there, because it's November and it's cold and the walk is 4 miles. She turned the book round on the table so that it faced the room. I don't write a figure I haven't walked to. That was the condition, and it was agreed to on a doorstep at 6 o'clock in the morning by a man standing in his own hens. The Hall of Thurlow began, disgracefully, to laugh. "Well," said the Duke when it had gone on long enough, "she's right. Strike it out. So tell me something before the lamp goes. What is it in your own life that you have stood on so long you have never once thought to take its level? The ground that has been quietly going down an inch a year while you were looking at the weather? Come back tomorrow night and we'll walk another bank together and see what the water says."